Thank you very much. That was fascinating. We look forward to the discussion. Dr. Zaman?
In the name of the cosmic reality, in whose totality we are our own presence as much as we are its presence. I believe that in the context of how we define the essence of our humanity, it's often lost to our superficial identities, national, political, religious, and otherwise. And that's why we never introduce ourselves as simple and plain human beings, but we use the other identities that are inherently creating otherness with the other that is presumed to be subhuman. When you create otherness, you have put yourself on a higher moral ground that you may or may not deserve. So even though the poetic might soothe your soul, it is the mind that demands of your rational existence to answer the question. And the question is that if we are all human beings, then how can we all behave as though we are simply animals? Only humans kill for the fun of it. That doesn't put us above animals. Only humans kill because the other is saluting a piece of cloth. Only humans kill because the other believes in a being through a perception that is different than yours. How could it be otherwise? We all have our own perceptions. But if this is a matter of opinion, we have to go through the dialectics that is designed to find truth through facts and figures so that our opinion will be justifiable. And in that, I reached a conclusion, at least tentatively, that the title of this presentation today, Muslim Voices Against Extremism, has a major flaw. And the flaw is that the word extremism is in the singular. I use the word dialectic deliberately. In dialectics, if we use, let's see, the rule of a pencil, that's my own made rule. If you hold a pencil by the middle point, how many extremes are there? There are always two extremes. And you can cut the pencil 10 times or as many times as you can. There will always be two extremes. But somehow, the dominant culture in the world has taken center stage, claiming it as its own, therefore fighting against the only extreme that is, quote unquote, the Islamic extreme. You cannot take the middle ground and then fight an extreme, because only extreme fights an extreme. Is anybody here fighting anyone? I doubt it, because none of you are extremists. But if one of you went to one extreme, whatever that extreme might be, based on religion, politics, ideology, whatever, and if the others opposed it, then the two extremes will fight. But the middle ground stays where it rightfully belongs. Today's humanity suffers from that, because it's the middle ground that is polarized, that is pushed one way or another. The claim that the problem is the Islamic extremism is the denial of the other extremism to which the Islamic extremism is responding. There's the question of action and reaction. To give you a simple example, was there an Al-Qaeda in Iraq? No. Is there an Al-Qaeda in Iraq? Yes. What created it? Because the West intervened, invaded, and occupied, and played with people's values and sensitivities, and people rejected it. So this extreme action produced that other extremism. What is Boko Haram? Haram means forbidden. Boko means Western values, Western culture. It's a sensitivity to Western values that are brought through the corporate culture of oligarchies, creating the word here, that is depriving the great majority of the biggest nation on the African continent of the natural resources they all have. Nigerians don't need to be poor. And so they are resisting that. So Boko Haram is fighting the West, not you and I, but those who in the name of the West had created an extremist policy of suppression of human rights and imposing dictator after dictator to deny the average Nigerian their rights. And so if we question whether there are two extremes or not, the common image that comes to one's mind, if I asked you a question, do you know of a country, and perhaps in the Middle East, where several hundred people have been killed because of their identity, religious, ideological, political, or otherwise? This group that has the power is killing those who believe differently. What will come to mind? ISIS? Wrong. Okay, I'll give you an example that probably comes to nobody's attention. Egypt. Okay? The government of Egypt, that is the recipient of the second largest amount of foreign aid from our democratic government, is sentencing members and leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood on daily and weekly basis, imposing on them death penalties. For what crime? Because they have a different formula to run the government. Say it's an ideology, but that's not a crime. And how many voices have been raised? Apparently none of you remember it. It doesn't get the attention. Yes, ISIS is there. There are many, Al-Shabaab and so on and so forth. But look at all of them. What is it that they're resisting? The Somalis, for instance, they were fighting a dictator for years. A dictator who was first supported by the Soviet Union, then supported by the United States, one of the poorest countries in Africa, who was lavishly spending on himself and spending almost the entire budget of the country on weapons that Somalia did not need. So when the dictatorship fell and the people chose Aidid as their prime minister, we intervened. Because for us, we say a government of the people, for the people, by the people. But we denied this very right to the people of Somalia. And we undermined Aidid, and you know the rest of the story from the Black Hawk Down and the rest of it. So we deliberately created a non-functional state in Somalia because we didn't like their government. Quite a principle for democracy. What is happening in general terms is that we often use a relativism, historical relativism, whereby we consider ourselves civilized and those in the past centuries and millennia as wild beasts. Well, the wild beasts would invite their opponents to a battle, to a duel. They will go out of towns and cities, and they will fight each other and resolve their problem that way with zero collateral damage. But after the invention of gunpowder and other explosive weapons, that zero eventually got to about 10%, and by World War I, 30% of the casualties of these wars by these civilized armies reached a very high proportion. In other words, the armies were killing the civilians, intentionally or otherwise. That is not civil. By World War II, it reached 50%. And after World War II, they convened, among other things, the Nuremberg trials to put on trial those who committed atrocities against human rights and civil liberties. They created the United Nations Charter so that countries will not be invading other countries for no reason. They created the Geneva Conventions, where rules of engagement and war would be such that a war would be conducted so that the civilians will not be suffering. What a wonderful idea. However, when the European warfare was transferred to other continents, where European ideology was fought over by North and South Korea, North and South Vietnam, and so on and so forth, there everybody forgot the Geneva Convention because the victims were not Europeans. And so if we killed 3 million Vietnamese civilians, it didn't matter, but our own 58,000 mattered very much. And where it has reached now is that in the latest conflicts, Afghanistan and Iraq, the civilian casualty is 90% of the casualties of these wars. So what happened to the Geneva Conventions? Remember General Tommy Frank, who said, "We are not in the business of body count. This man is wearing the uniform of the United States of America as signatory to the Geneva Convention. He should be taken to the Nuremberg like trials." But he simply says, it doesn't matter because the lives lost are not European. And that's the concept of the cultural relativism. We also have to think about the $169 billion of arms transfer from the United States that is fueling every conflict in the Middle East. This is only in the first 5 years of Obama's administration, our peace laureate president. This number is greater than any president since World War II, $169 billion. And it's depriving those people of the resources that could be spent on a lot of good things. And a conversation was caught by the Intercept between the head of Lockheed Martin and the Deutsche Bank representative, who are glowing in the fact that their profits have exceeded 25% because of all these wars that are going on. So therefore, we have commodified the human life, and we have given a financial worth to our weapons. And through it, we are destroying the whole world, and therefore, the idea that we are civilized has to be questioned. That we are adherents to all the Geneva Conventions, United Nations Charter, and so on and so forth, has to be questioned. I have other ideas. We will take those up later. Thank you.